I am Mark Hall-Patton. I am your moderator for the evening. No, I am not Amish, in case you hadn't known that in the past. It's just an Amish hat. Tonight, we are going to be speaking about Pittman. Now, I have to tell you a story before we get started. When I first moved here in 1993, there was a radio show on that was out of a gun shop up here on Boulder Highway. And this was the time period when there was a big push to rename Green Valley and not Henderson. Well, on the radio show, the guys that were on that show didn't really take affront to that, but they said, you know, you're right, we should rename that area and we should rename it what it really is, West Pittman. And so I've always thought of my home area as West Pittman, since I happen to live in the Green Valley area. So before we get to the speakers, I'm going to ask Lou Laporta to come up. He's got a few words of introduction for us.
Is this a live speaker? It is.
No, you're the live speaker, but that's a live microphone.
Okay. Well, I'm going to explain myself. I want to tell you that it's a very good evening. I see a very large crowd out there, probably one of the largest crowds we've had for some of these lectures. So on behalf of the Henderson Historical Society, I'm so pleased that you're here. You make these lecture series really, really more adamant. But tonight I read so much about the history of this area that I'm not an old-timer anymore. The point is this. When I came here, I thought there was history. But now when I read so much of this, the history really, really goes way back in the 30s and even probably to the 20s. So I can't talk about that, but I can talk to you a little about how this whole thing created. The city of Henderson would not have been a city if it wasn't for the Pittman area. Now, we didn't have the luxury at the time that the conclave of the BMI, because we were resident holders. We were not owners of land. That held us back in trying to get a city of Henderson going. So I just want to explain to you that Pittman carried the ball so many ways, even way back in history. So I'm not going to name any family that I knew in the Pittman area. But there was one family that I am going to talk about, and that's the Coronas family. Dorothy Coronas and their family, Alex, Paul, George, did an awful lot of work for the gateway to the Henderson area. Years ago, that family, and which were other families in town, did an awful lot of work, and particularly Alex. Alex, at the time that I was on the board that I could do something for him, he says, why don't you get some money and get that county to really put some roadways here. I says, Alex, you and your brothers have always been great pals of me. But I said, I tell you what I want you to do. You go up to the bank, open up an account, and if you get $20,000, leave it in there. And when the county has the opportunity to go ahead and put some roads for you, because you need the roads, he surprised me. He got $20,000 and put it in the bank, and that's where it was. Well, he put the gun on me because the county didn't have time to do all that because it was summer work. It wasn't the pavement. It was a sand that was mixed in with the oil. And that's the story of that one. But one last thing about Alex and George. They were plumbers. And I says, could you put a water line on the Boulder Highway and do it, you know, and put a plant there so you're the gateway to Henderson? He did. So that's all I'm going to tell you about, because the history is really here in this town. They go back to the 20s, and we're happy to have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. No, those stay there. That's this.
No, that's not.
This one isn't
no,
yours.
I wouldn't,
Yeah.
that's your material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the secret stuff.
Okay.
But don't worry, you'll all know it by the end of the evening. It's not that secret. It's your talk. We have 3 speakers tonight that are going to talk about the history of Pittman. They've been part of it in various ways. I should point out, by the way, that Pittman isn't the original name for that area. It was also known as Midway. It was also known as St. Anne. There were a number of other names that were used, but when it finally got a post office in 1942, it was the Pittman Post Office, and it retained that post office until 1974. So you had, in fact, where's Mrs. Korn? There you are. Yeah, was it your mother that was the postmistress there?
No, it was her husband, actually.
Her-
He was, I think, the second postmaster, as I remember.
There we go. And so we've got even somebody connected to that post office here in the audience. But our 3 speakers tonight, I think, are going to be very interesting. We're going to start with Dorothy. Dorothy Corneros. Did I get it right that time? Coronas. Dang it. I knew I was going to do that. I do apologize. I knew I was going to do it. She came to Henderson in the late 1940s from New Mexico. She worked at the Bank of Nevada and was mentored by Selma Bartlett. She married Alex, I'm not even going to try again because I'll get it wrong again, and moved with him to Pittman and began to learn the plumbing business. That was what my great uncles used to do. Had many friends in Pittman, grew up there, and was very involved with it. Worked with the Women's Club there to found parks and develop activities that teach and nurture youth. She's done a lot, and we're looking forward to her talk. She'll be our first speaker tonight. Our second speaker will be Bobbie Ellis. He was raised in southern Nevada. I'm sorry, did I take you out of order?
I was sitting over there and I thought I didn't know it was me or not.
Well, it wasn't until you moved, but now it is. You know, we always try to, I'm very flexible. I'll work this any way you want. But he was a student at Nevada Southern, which is kind of nice that you call it Nevada Southern. That's good. In the 1960s, before it became UNLV, he's an entrepreneur and successful businessman. Has helped to shape the community of Pittman with his company Snaptoe. It's an important business there. Also well known for his philanthropy. They've adopted, 11 schools there, which that is going some. Thank you very much for that. And so he will be talking about his history in Pittman. And then our third speaker is somebody who gets a little nervous in front of a camera. So I'm a little sorry to force him to be up here in front of you. And that is Jim Marsh. And there's not much that one needs to say about Jim. He's been on television a lot. He's beaten me on television, I think, with his ads. Very much involved here. He's from Grand Island, Nebraska originally, but don't hold that against him. He really likes Southern Nevada history. He likes it so well that he goes out and buys it. I mean, entire buildings. He has preserved a huge amount of Southern Nevada history, but he's also the owner of the Skyline Casino, which is part of Pittman today and has been expanding down there in that. So we are looking forward to what he has to say. So our first speaker, Dorothy, I'm going to let you come up. Dorothy has a talk that she's going to read here. And see, I told you it'd be easy. You'd know when.
I'm not a public speaker like these 2 characters over there, so I'm going to read my speech, if you'll bear with me. Early in 1940, Nick Pop Coronas settled his family in Pittman. Pop operated a Greek restaurant with some rental rooms upstairs at a 2-story building where Skyline Hotel and Casino now exists. Both Coronas boys, Alex and Paul, attended basic high school. Alex was a star football player, and received many awards. After graduation from basic, Alex attended St. Mary's College in San Francisco. He was lonesome for his family, so returned to Pittman and joined his brother. His brother George in the plumbing business at 1524 Boulder Highway, where air gas presently exists. Corona's Plumbing was booming and was a prime contractor for water line installation at the Black Mountain Country Club golf course community. Alex wanted more adventure in the working field, so in the early 1960s, he joined his good friend and talented roofer, Lloyd Elliott, in the roofing business. They purchased a 5-acre plot at Boulder Highway, which became 241-247 Elliott Road. This 5-acre area presently has various business owners renting that have been at the same location for over 30 years. In the 60s, nothing existed between the 5-acre and Votech School. Since then, we have the Galleria Mall, Home Depot, Sunset Casino, and many more. The Coronas family sold their restaurant and settled at a home at 441 Jefferson. Some of the area was being populated with custom homes and the streets were not paved. Alex was concerned with the dust level as the community grew. He called upon his friend Lou Laporta, our councilman and good supporter of that area, and knew Lou would help. Thus began the paving of Pittman streets. My family had been back and forth from Pittman as my father could not find housing for us to permanently join him. My mother refused to live in the small available cabins located behind the Victory Club in Pittman. We stayed at my grandfather's ranch in New Mexico until my dad secured a rental apartment at Victory Village. I had been enrolled in so many schools with my father's business, he transferred us across New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. My grandfather in New Mexico became quite ill, so my mother took me back to New Mexico and I graduated there. Coming back to Henderson, my first job after high school was at Bank of Nevada. Selma Bartlett took me under her wing and I learned every aspect of the banking business. She was a tough person to work for and she believed in hard work. I am so grateful for that education. Through her insistence, I joined the library and hospital boards. I admire and adore Selma Bartlett. While working for Bank of Nevada, I met Pop Coronas. He would stand in my long teller lines just to learn if I was available to date his son. Although Pop wanted a Greek girl for his son, he told Alex if he didn't marry me, he would. In 1961, I came to Pittman as a young bride. Coming to the small community, I was green behind the ears, but I soon joined the ladies from the Pittman Women's Club. We planned parties for the area children, using the Pittman Library as our headquarters. I will never forget the talent and kindness of the wonderful ladies I learned to love. Mary Roberts, Ruth Korn, Mary Foster, Artie Cannon, to name a few. Ray Von Dornum came to our events to write about us in the home news. She was a grand lady as well. My time in Pittman was one of the most treasured highlights of my life. Now that we are Henderson, I have both worlds to always remember. Before I conclude, I would like to have the Hart family in the audience to please stand. Doug Hart and his daughter, please. I wanted to extend my sincere thanks to both of you for the sharing of your mother and wife, Rosalie Hart. She was an employee of Elliott Roofing for several years. I know these were difficult years as she had to jockey being a wife and mother and still run an office for Alex Coronas. Her contributions and good working skills helped our business succeed. I know she is in heaven giving Alex pointers on how to curb the temper. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Dorothy. All right, our next speaker is Bob. You don't have to come up if you don't want to, or you can stand there wherever you'd like to speak.
I am standing.
Oh, okay.
I think I'll stay. Can you hear me okay? I'm not like the Honorable Judge Delwyn Potter back there. I have to take notes for two reasons. I want to see what I'm supposed to say, and after I get through saying, I want to see what I just said. So, Delwyn Potter, I'm not picking on you tonight, but Delwyn Potter was elected in 1970 or 1969 as the youngest JP in the history of the United States. So give him a little hand there, Delwyn. Now here's the story on this. Delwyn's dad was Dell, D-E-L-L. So on the ballot, everybody thought they was voting for his dad. Well, Delwyn Potter woke up from the boiler room at Titanium and found out he had just been elected JP in Henderson. Now that is a true story, Delwyn. You can't lie about that. And then I see a couple other people in there. I wasn't going to pick on Baby K. Baby K Nielsen. I don't know if you guys remember Baby K. He had a backhoe company. Just a beautiful, beautiful man, and the mom and all that stuff. So, and Rodney, the brother. Just some great memories. So I'm glad to see them here. Dorothy wanted me to talk a little bit about what brought us to Pittman. But before I start there, I want to bring up some memories on people that helped me as a young kid. I moved up here in 1959, graduated from Rancho High School, valedictorian, by the way. No, I barely made it. But Delwyn will remember the first guy I want to bring up. His name was Lee Estes. He owned Nevada Auto Wrecking. You guys remember Lee? Well, did you know Lee was a safe cracker for the mob? And that is a true story. They would fly him anywhere in the United States to crack a safe. And I think he helped you 1 year on your campaign, didn't he, Delwyn? Put some signs up endorsing you? You guys remember that. It wasn't an endorsement. Frank Price owned Price's Trailer Court across the street from Southern Nevada Auto Parts. This guy, to me, was a legend. Mr. Price would come over there and buy tires, engines, transmissions for his tenants to make sure these people could get to work. And he would add it on the rent and all that stuff. You know, you don't see people like that anymore. So he was just a great guy. I can still remember him coming over there, picking up the tires and wheels and helping people. John Liguori. Now, many, many years ago, and I had to ask Delwyn about this, he had a little place called, we don't remember the name, so maybe a little help. It had the famous ham sandwiches. Do you remember the name of that? It wasn't Liguori's back then, and he had the apartments on the east side. And then John was a great man. And then him and John Quiche and one other John, I don't remember the name, built the Skyline Casino. When the things got bad, John sold out and went back to Des Moines. Then he come back years later and opened up Liguori's Bar. John was my hero. In fact, he never knew I was 21 because I had a fake ID from the Nellis Air Force Base so I could drink in his place. Sorry, Dylan. Jack and Dolores Mowry owned the Swanky Club. And I remember Sharon Mallory, Dick, and Jack Mallory. They had, I would say, that probably the first smorgasbord in Nevada. I mean, I don't remember other people having the great people, hard workers, and that's where the Joker's Wells is located now. This gal, I think about her all the time, Mrs. Cassidy. Remember her? The ice lady. You guys remember the ice lady? Delwyn, you remember her? Andy Hafen, you're too young, so but Delwyn would. This gal would deliver ice to different places. She would handle that ice, 50-pound, yes, 50-pound bags to dry ice, and put her kids through college. In fact, one of them is an attorney in Las Vegas right now. Alex, George, Paul. I met them by accident. I stopped in a bar called the Rounders. And the next thing I knew, I'm getting up off the ground. Alex knocked me out. Not my fault, being a young kid and all that stuff, but then Stevie Sunline says, you know who you guys just got in a fight with? And I says, no, and he told me the Coronas brothers, Lloyd, and a couple other guys, so we became friends over that. One thing about the people from the Pittman area, whatever they said, their word was good. You didn't have to sign something. It was a handshake. It's always been that way, the people in the Pittman area. They're just great people. Do you guys remember Pat Doherty? Pat Doherty was the building inspector. Well, it wasn't my fault, but in 1976, we opened up B&E Auto Auction. And Baby K and a few others down there, and we decided we'd put a saddle to the septic going down Boulder Highway. Everything went good until a guy, and this guy was very honest, Delwyn told me, Harry Polk come by and caught us. Well, Harry Polk, if you guys remember Harry Polk, he was the biggest. They had to screw him in the ground. They did. So I didn't know what to do. I mean, we got caught red-handed. So I went up and seen Pat Doherty, and I said, Pat, this is what happened. He said, well, Bob, you know what? Open up. He's doing, you forgot to pick your permit up. Go up there and pay for it. That's how we got by on that. Sam and Ruth Cohen Salvage. You remember those? They had a little salvage company down by Jim Marsh's place. Ruth Cohen, we would take our scrap radiators down there and sell them. But Ruth Cohen would take the brass fittings and the copper out of the carburetors, even put them in 55-gallon drums. Sam Cohen and Ruth were good friends with Sam Boyd, and they talked Ruth and Sam into going into the mayor helped me on this, Union Plaza. From there, they sold out, and they went into the California Club. They sold out, and they went into Sam's Club, Sam's Town. Well, when Ruth Cohen sold her stock, she was this biggest stockholder beside the Boyd Group, and she sold for $200 million. The little gal out there taking those screws and out. We ought to do that at your place, Marsh. You got any old carburetors I can work on? So what happened in 1957, my dad had a trucking company hauling hay for the farmers. Well, the farmer decided that it was going to start shipping by railroad, so my dad kind of panicked and sold out. And he came up here, and there was a wrecking yard called Henderson Auto Wrecking. So Dad bought out Vern Holt and Roy Holt, and then in 1960, they opened up Southern Nevada Auto Parts, known as Snap. You guys remember Snap? So in 1972, Delwyn, Judge Potter, and me started Snap Tow. And that's a long story, but I'm going to tell you a quick story. Back then you could bid for the towing. Well, we went before the city council when Delwyn said, let's bid 1/10 of 1% of our gross income. Remember that, Delwyn? We didn't know what kind of income we was going to have. Well, Bill Bill Day from Tri-City Motors had the towing. He got mad, he walked out and says, okay, you guys own the towing. I looked at Delwyn looked at me, we didn't even own a tow truck. When Dick Spooner and Dad started Southern Nevada Parts, they bought 8 acres on Boulder Highway, some of it was frontage, for $500 an acre. So 1970, the West sisters from Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. West had passed away, and they wanted to sell us 2 acres on Boulder Highway. Well, we didn't have no money. So they sold it to us, I forget the amount, $15,000 or $20,000. No down payment, no interest. I mean, I don't think we even signed any, I think we did sign papers. So that gave us 10 acres. Well, I bought my brother out of the business and the property in 1990, and I had to start Beanie Auto Auction, which is a salvage pool for insurance companies. They sell wrecked and disabled vehicles, and we needed more property. So I started buying property around me, and the first 6 acres was pretty cheap, $100,000 an acre. And then, you guys remember the Victory Club? I bought some property behind that. That was $200,000 an acre. And then I bought 11 acres on Warm Springs, and that was $400,000 an acre. So you can see from going from $500 an acre to what property's worth. But my dad always said, and I'm sure Jim Marsh did too, if you could double your money, sell, and just thank God we didn't do that. So in 2008, me and my wife, been married 52 years, we sold the business, Beanie Auto Auction, to a public traded company, and we kept the property, and we leased back 29 acres to IAA, which has been very good. We gifted Snap-Tow to our son and our nephew, and they're doing great in Snap-Tow. They're doing things I would never dreamed of doing. But that's what brought us to Pittman. Again, the people that we've met, and it's just been a great experience. And again, Delwyn Potter, when we had the tow company, he would be JP and work all night towing cars and all that stuff. His dad, Mr. Dale Potter, should have been the real JP. He was helping us all the time. But I appreciate everybody being here. And now we got the expert who can tell you about what's going on in town.
Thank you, Bobbie. That's very good. I want to say I'm Johnny come lately to Pittman there. My roots started in 2003 here, so I am not an expert on Pittman, but I do have, I think, the only sign in Nevada. You've seen the Welcome to the Fabulous Las Vegas signs? Well, I've got one that says Welcome to the Fabulous Pittman, Nevada. So it's hanging in the skyline. So, but little story Bob reminded me about people and how things have changed. I had a friend of mine that we used to work for the Review Journal, Boyd Hagan, and Boyd used to have a drink occasionally, and of course I joined him from time to time, and he had, I think it was like a 73 AMC, and he was driving down Boulder Highway out in this area going home, and a cop stopped him, and he said, "Officer, what are you stopping me for?" He says, "I was not speeding." And the officer says, "Well, you only have one headlight on." And Boyd said, "Well, that's not too good." He says, "You only have one headlight on too." "Yeah," he says, "but you're looking at my motorcycle." So he said, "Have you been drinking?" He said, "Well, of course I've been drinking." He says, "Well, where do you live?" And he told him, and he's 4 or 5 blocks away. He says, "Well, I'll follow you home." And he did. So those things don't happen anymore, but kind of a little sideline on Pittman. But I bought the Skyline in 2003 from John Kish, and we have a picture hanging in there of what it was originally, which was the Dixie Bar. And I had a customer here several years come up, and it was 2-story, I think, like you mentioned, Dorothy. And she says, "That's where my husband and I lived, in that 2nd-story apartment when we first got married. So that's a little bit of the history on that. But I bought it from John Kish, and Selma Bartlett handled the financing for me. And that probably went as smooth as anything I've ever done in my life. Between John Kish, who was a perfect gentleman, and Selma Bartlett, who she was the Lord, so to speak, here in the Henderson area. And she put that financing through, and like I say, we were in business in 6 months, which is breakneck speed to get through keeping control and get it financed and so forth. So it went very well. And the property that I bought from John, there was one lot that he had leased, and it ran perpendicular across the parking lot, and John had always leased that. And I wanted to buy it, and the investor from out of Texas, he owned it. And I approached him about selling it, and he gave me a price that was just out of sight. And I said, no, well, he says, I've got some other property here in town. He had some lots down on Fremont Street that he leased, like the Fitzgerald and so forth. He says, you're not paying me near as much as they are. I said, well, it's a little different on Boulder Highway than it is on Fremont Street. So, but anyway, the recession hit and things went down, and he came to me and he says, I guess the property's not worth what it was. So I bought the casino, or the lot, it was a 25-foot lot, for what I consider a fair price. And that's where we built the hotel here that we opened last year. So thank goodness I did get that, or we'd probably never been able to build that hotel. But what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, and like I say, I'm not certainly knowledgeable on the area like most of you are here, but I have explored a little bit of southern Nevada. I'm going to hit just a few things that you may be of interest in, maybe tell you a few little stories that you may know of or may not. I'm going to start with Nelson, Nevada. And most of you probably know where Nelson is, however, you probably don't get there very often, but an old mining town down right off the Colorado River. And a fellow who I knew down there, his name was Merle Emery. I don't know if any of you in this room knew Merle. I see some head shaking. And he grew up in that area. His father was a boatman on the Colorado River. And he originally came to Oatman, Arizona, excuse me, with his mother and father and his two brothers and sisters. And they came all the way from Los Angeles to Oatman on a train, if you can believe that. I had no idea that trains went there, but when we went by, he took me there and showed me the train station that is still there. But anyway, his father was a boatman on the river. He used to ferry people back and forth across the Colorado River. And when they built the dam, the Bureau of Reclamation hired his father to do a lot of the chartering up and down the river with men and supplies and so forth. And his father, they tell the story about they were doing some work when they first started filling the dam on the upper lake. And if you remember, there's kind of a lower lake and an upper lake, and there's a narrow passage that kind of goes between the two with some fairly high bluffs there. And they didn't have two-way radios or anything there, so they used pigeons. They had carrier pigeons. So they go out in the upper lake, they'd take a carrier pigeon with them, and they needed to communicate. They would tie a note to the pigeon's leg, and it'd fly back to where they're building the dam, and that's how they communicated. Well, they finally, the pigeons started disappearing, and they couldn't figure out what happened to the pigeons. Well, the eagles found out that the pigeons were flying there, and they nested on those cliffs and would get the pigeons as they flew back and forth. So, little sideline on that. But Merle was a very interesting guy. He was a miner, and he ran he had the ferry boat also. But in those days there was Mark, you'll remember this, renegade Indian by the name of Quayo. And Quayo was a friend of his dad's, and from time to time, like I say, this was when I say a renegade Indian, he had killed several white men, and he was very much feared in this area. But he was a friend of his dad's, and he would come and from time to time have dinner with the family there, and was a friend of, like I say, Merle's father. But Merle said by the time the morning came, he was never there. He was always gone. Quayle ended up being found dead up in Valley of Fire in a cavern up there. And they brought his bones back to Las Vegas. And for years, his bones were around town in various places. The Elks Club used to put them on display for El Dorado. And they had him in a box, and they'd take him in the parades and so forth. Finally, I guess they thought better of it, and the bones disappeared. But he is buried in a place called Cathedral Canyon. And Cathedral Canyon, I see some of you probably know where it is, was down by Tacopa. And it had been bought by a fellow by the name of Roland Wiley. Roland Wiley was the district attorney here in the early 40s. And he acquired this property. Most of it was across the California line, but part of it was in Nevada there. And he put a landing strip there, which is still there to this day. And like I say, the Quayle is buried there, and there's a slab of cement over it with his name inscribed in it. But Roland, it was right on the old Spanish Trail, and a lot of history down there. I pulled up the other day is the oral history on Roland Wiley. And one of the things that he quoted here, and I'll write this does have something to do with Pittman. It says, how well did you know the people associated with the BMI, the basic magnesium? And Roland said, I used to sit and visit with them at the El Cortez Hotel, where the president and different officials of BMI plant lived when they first started. I told one of them, gee, I wish I owned this hotel. He said, well, why do you say that? You are a guest here, and these bellhops do what you want to. You've got the waitress to serve you, and you go to the dining room. You don't have to pay taxes. You got no worries. Why do you think you own it? Why don't you think that you want to own the hotel? Enjoy it. It was good advice, wasn't it? You don't have to own it to enjoy it. So that was one of his quotes that has to do with BMI. But like I say, I've done a little on this oral history of Roland. He ran for governor twice, the Democratic Party. He got beaten the primary both times. And he went on to, he knew Pat McCarran. Apparently, when it came in the election of the, I forget what year it was, but he supported Tasker Oddie. Tasker Oddie had been the governor and the senator from Nevada, and he was a Republican, so, but he liked Tasker very much. But Tasker Oddie, that's another story. I'm going to ramble, but that's the way it goes, so you just got to put up with me. But Tasker Oddie came to Austin, Nevada in the 1800s, and he was hired, he was an attorney that came out of to represent one of the mining interests in Austin. And what was the name of the guy who came out to, would you remember? There's a castle's named after him up there.
Oh, no.
But anyway,
Shay's Castle.
he came out and he worked for the mining guy for a few years, and then he got in a crossways with the accountant, and he got fired. And Tasker was a poor man at that time, and he rode horses and mules over to Belmont, Nevada, and he started, he was a mining guy. He'd ride his horses and mules out to his mine interests every day. And that was about in the 1800s when they built the Belmont Courthouse. And he was elected the district attorney of Nye County. That was back when Nye County, the courthouse was in Belmont. They subsequently moved it in the early 1900s to Tonopah, Nevada. But anyway, Roland Wiley, like I say, I've read his oral history. Very interesting guy. Knew a lot of the names that pop up there that he talks about. Pat Clark, who I knew, Bob Keltenborn, who developed the Rancho Circle in Huttridge area, was a friend of his. Some of the names that he mentions there, like I say, he retired. I think he died about 1985, somewhere in there. But Bob Keltenborn, any of you remember that name? He was a developer back in the 40s and 50s. He became a friend of mine, and we were going to lunch one day. We were going to the Sands Hotel. We were driving down the Strip, and at that time they just broke ground on the Fashion Show Mall. And Bob was a big man. He said, you know, he says, I used to think I was the smartest white man in Clark County, but he said, I think I'm probably one of the dumbest guys ever put on this earth. And I said, well, Bob, why do you say that? He'd been very successful. He said, you know, he said, that fashion show, which is on 40-some acres, he says, I owned that one time. He said the gentleman that owned it had passed away, and it was left to one of his heirs, his daughter. And her brother was trying to break the will. He said, we bought that property for $12,000. And we were afraid that one of the heirs was going to try to overturn our purchase of it. And we got somebody that would pay us $12,500, and we sold that property and made a $500 bill. So you imagine how smart we were at the time and how dumb we are today. But anyway, he ended up marrying Pop Simon's widow, who had Pop Simon's there, Gene, and Bob was quite a guy. But let me tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Nelson, Nevada. And at one time I had a house down there for a short period of time. And I subsequently sold it to a friend of mine called Doc Brown, and he lived there the rest of his life. But Nelson's a very interesting area. It's not exactly the garden spot of Nevada, but nevertheless very interesting. Most of you probably remember the Ron Rudin murder. Any of you remember that? Ron was a realtor here in town, and let me back up a little bit. His ex-wife was Carolyn Rudin, who was a friend of mine. They had been divorced. He remarried Margaret. Carolyn called me one Saturday night, and she said, Ron has disappeared. And I said, well, Ron used to be a pretty heavy drinker. I said, well, he's probably on a bench. She says, no. She said, he hasn't had a drink in 2 or 3 years. She said, I'm worried about him. I said, oh, he'll be all right. Well, little did I know that his current wife, Margaret, had killed him that night. And she and her accomplice rented a van, disassembled the guy, cut his arms and legs off and so forth, put him in a box, took him down to Nelson, set the box on fire, and that was, anyway, that was but what Carolyn told me later, and she didn't tell me the time, Ron told her that night, he said, if anything happens to me, he says, Margaret did it. And she did. But also my barber, who was Bob White, was a good friend of Ron's. And the attorney across the street was Ron's estate attorney. And Bob told me, he said, the estate attorney, Ron had called him and said, I need to have you come in, meet me tomorrow to get my estate changed. And the attorney said, okay, well, he got killed before he got his estate changed. Margaret subsequently, they didn't catch her for several years. I happened to, before she got arrested, a friend of mine by the name of Tony DeCio, who was a private detective in town, and he was doing some work for Margaret Rudin. And he said, would you like to have lunch with Margaret? And I said, yeah, I would. We had lunch, I think it was at the Bootlegger. And she was the nicest, unassuming little Kansas lady that you've ever seen, with the long dress and the pinafores and just this real sweetheart, but also a very, very vicious person on the other side. Not only did she kill Ron, but her daughter, she came from Kansas. She'd been married to a horse farmer or horse rancher in Kansas. And she had set the horse barn on fire to collect the insurance and killed all the horses. She had a daughter that lived here in town. She asked, Margaret went over there to babysit while they were out of town with their little Pekingese dog. The daughter and her husband got home. The dog was floating in the swimming pool with his head cut off. But anyway, they had a heck of a time finding her. They finally caught her back. She was on the 10 Most Wanted, and somebody back, I think she was in Massachusetts, recognized her, and they finally arrested her, and she's in jail right now today. But anyway, Ron's body was burned up down there at Nelson, Nevada. But Nelson is, like I say, kind of there's an old area down there called Wall Street where the mines used to be. And there's a lot of history down there. The Tehachapi mine is still open down there, and it's open for tours. If none of you have done it, I would encourage you to do it. It's well worth it. Let's see where we go from here. A friend of mine by the name of Billy Parker, and Billy Parker was married to Benny Binion's daughter, Barbara. And apparently the marriage didn't last long, but Billy is an old timer. He lives down in Riverside, California. But he has more stories about early Nevada and so forth. And I would love to get him here sometime because he could tell stories that just make you shake your head. But one of the stories he does tell, he was dealing down on Fremont Street, and Howard Hughes came in with a lady on his arm, and Billy went over and introduced him and says, "Mr. Hughes, I'm Billy Parker. How can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I'd like to cash a check and play a little 21, I think it was." And Billy said, "Well, certainly." So Howard wrote him a check and took it over to the cashier cage, and Billy signed off as guaranteeing the check or endorsing the check. I think it was for $20. And Howard played for 15, 20 minutes or so, and got up to thank Billy Parker. He's very polite. And Billy said, "Well, Mr. Hughes, please come back, sometime." A week later, the pit boss called him over and says, "Hey, Billy," he says, "that check that you signed off for last week bounced." Billy says, "Really?" He says, "What do you want to do?" He says, "Well, put it back in again, and we'll see if it can go through again." He put it back in the second time. Bounced the second time. And the pit boss called Billy over and said, "Billy, this is about enough. This check came back twice. What are you going to do?" Billy said, I made the biggest mistake of my life. He says, I said, "Boss, put it through one more time." He said, "If I would have given him that $20 and picked up that NSF check from Howard Hughes, think what that would be worth today." But anyway, that's kind of one of the stories that Billy tells. But Billy, like I say, he knows all the old timers and can tell stories and this, that, and the other. I'd love to get him over here sometime. Years ago, the Spanish Trail goes right through, comes up through northeast Nevada, down through Blue Diamond, down through Tacoma. And I took a trip down there one time. There's Bill Wright, and he was the manager of the Review-Journal at the time, and a fellow by the name of Scoop Garside, and what was Jimmy's name? Anyway, they had an organization that they went over the old Spanish Trail, and they remarked it with markers, concrete markers. And I went with them on a trip from Blue Diamond down to Tacoma. And unfortunately, most of those markers are destroyed today. Villains have got in and shot them up and so forth. But so this trail is not as easily recognizable as it used to. But we were going down this one incline, and these guys knew the history of the Spanish Trail very, very well. And at this particular time, when the wagons would go down, they would block the wheels, because if they didn't, the wagons, the gravity, they'd run over the horses and mules that were taking them down there. So at this particular decline, we were going down in four-wheel drive vehicles, and Scoop Garside stopped and walked over and picked up the most beautiful porcelain oil can I've ever seen in my life. And it was for greasing the axles on those Conestoga wagons that they used to bring out here. When Scoop died, I went to his widow. I said, "Miss Garside, I would love to buy that from you." And she said, "No way in hell." So I never did get it. But anyway, it was quite a treasure from the 1800s. But the Spanish Trail went down through Tacoma, and you can still see a lot of the ruts down there in that area. I told you a little bit about Roland Wiley and the Cathedral Canyon. There's a natural canyon down there that's probably 50, 60 feet deep, probably 100, 150 feet wide. And at one time, he built a suspension bridge across it. And down in this canyon, he had it electrified. And he had crosses down there, and he had all types of religious things. And it actually, you push one of the buttons, it would actually play hymns. And it was really neat to see. Unfortunately, vandals have virtually destroyed that. And it's a shame, but that seems to happen. But in his memoirs here, he talks about I say artifacts not the right term, but there are, and I've seen it myself, there's a path that goes down there, and if you look, you can find it. It's a vertebrae of antique whatever, rhinoceros, whatever. But it's a vertebrae that's about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, and it's sticking on the edge of the wall of this little trail that goes down there. I haven't been down there for years, but I would imagine to this day it's still there. He built a runway. He used to fly in and out of there. At that time, there was no roads going down there. It took him 4 hours to go from Las Vegas down to the Cathedral Canyon, which is not that far away, maybe 70, 80 miles. But in later years, the dopers started using that runway to fly dope in and out of. So it got a little contentious at that time. Like I said, I'm going to jump around a bit. I don't know how many of you have been to Devil's Hole up in Amargosa Valley. Devil's Hole is a very ominous water feature. It's surrounded by very dark rocks, and the so-called endangered pupfish live there. They're about that long, about a half an inch long. There's only about 40 or 50 of them. And years ago, before my time, there were 3 fellows from the University of Nevada, UNLV, that went up there, and they with their scuba diving gears. And 2 of them went down, and the third one stayed on the surface. And the second one came up. The third one never came up. They went down looking for him. The second guy went down looking for him. He never came up. The third fellow went back to Las Vegas for search and rescue. They came out. They never found what happened to those 2 fellows. And to this day, nobody knows where they are. There's all kinds of stories about maybe them coming up, parts of their gear coming up in the Gulf of Mexico. I doubt if that's true. But anyway, the government has it fenced off now. They spent more money on those damn pupfish than you can ever believe. I wish somebody just put half a case of dynamite down there and blow the little bastards away. It'd save the taxpayers a lot of money. But anyway, that's part of the Ash Meadows Refuge now. There's have any of you been, I'm sure you have been, to the Marta Beckett Theater in Amargosa Valley? Marta passed away a year ago. I went to her service. It was nice. But they're celebrating her 50th anniversary the second weekend of March. So anybody's interested might want to take that in. She's got a protege out there now that's performing on Friday and Saturday nights. She's not drawing the crowds that Marta was, but hopefully they're able to continue it. That property needs a lot of care, and I don't think they have any money, but it's something that hopefully is preserved.
Well, I think you understand what I said, that I was a little nervous about Marsh not having anything to say. I hate to cut you off, Marsh, but thank you. We do have some early photos of Pittman that, Rick, you're going to show?
Well, I have one.
You have one, okay. We have an early picture of Pittman to be thrown up on the screen.
Well, this is
So,
maybe Dorothy can tell us about this
that's
picture.
all right, just put it on up.
That's it, right there. Is it?
It's not up. Yes. This was the great 74 snowstorm. Everybody remembers that. That was actually 94. That was the only time I've ever closed the county museum for snow. It was 7.5 inches at the county museum. I remember it. There you go.
Dorothy, tell us about this building. How old is it and who was there?
This is the store where Corona's Plumbing was, and the tenant air gas has been there over 20 years. Can anybody hear me?
Yep, good. Are there other ones?
It's on Boulder Highway. It's 1524 Boulder Highway.
You're going to have to move it down. There's only half a head there. Yeah, the bar owner.
Yeah, I wanted to pay a compliment to Henderson Libraries, particularly Dana Bulliard, who helps us every time we put on a program. She finds old photographs and does research for us. And so one of the nice things that she collected for this activity was a booklet that was put out by the Henderson Chamber of Commerce in 1971. They did this every year to celebrate industrial days. And in 71, they put Jim Thorpe's picture on the cover. I'm going to show you another picture.
Just,
Rick, you know what the C stands for?
Carlisle.
Thank you.
Carlisle School of India.
and does anybody remember his bar on Boulder Highway in Pittman? It stood until last year when City of Henderson, are there any City of Henderson folks here? You guys led a demolition permit on that building. That was a mistake. My only editorial comment.
Mark and I had been talking about this, and
that's
before our conversation, I'd driven down there, and I was going to take a picture of it. And of course, it was just a vacant lot. And so I went home and looked on Google Maps, and Google Maps hadn't caught up with the fact that the building was gone, and they still were showing a picture of it. And so I saved that. And hopefully nobody from Google will find out or don't want a royalty on this or something. But that's where it was. And you can see in the distance, that's the Joker's Wild. So you kind of give you a sense of where it was, 1100 North Boulder Highway. But so on the Jim Thorpe booklet, you can find that on the Henderson Library's digital collection. And it's, there's the digital collection has a list of things that you can look at. The old Henderson Home News, copies of the Henderson Home News from the 50s until they went out of business in the early 2000s. If you like history, it's fascinating to search through these things. And these booklets are great. And this particular one, the one that has the picture of Jim Thorpe on the cover.
Well, the building was just, it's a Quonset hut. But it happened to be, that was the building that Jim Thorpe had his bar in. Yeah, it had gone through a number of different businesses even since I got here in the the early 90s.
That was called the Hut Club. For old timers, that was the Hut Club. And when Jim Thorpe owned it, it was a sportsman's lounge. I have a friend, Mike Mannion. His dad, Hugh Mannion, was a railroader. And he liked to drink on the weekends. And so he concocted this excuse to take all the neighborhood kids down to meet Jim Thorpe. And of course, during the course of that, he hoisted a few himself. Jim Thorpe did a lot of nice things for kids in southern Nevada. If any of you know Virgil Weiss's mother, Virgil was just a good ball player at Basic High School and a good guy, an electrician, and just did a lot of nice things in southern Nevada. But Virgil's mother, she documented everything that he did from the time he was a little league player until he graduated from Basic High School. And she had and Virgil gave the Historical Society a good part of these albums, clippings and pictures, and she had a nice picture of Jim Thorpe at a high school All-America game for Southern Nevada up in Boulder City, and he put on his old baseball uniform and attended that game and signed autographs and talked to kids. That was just one of a good many things that he did. You know, the Sean Robertson from city planning with the city of Henderson and some of his co-workers have made a nice display of some old pictures of the Boulder Highway. So, I mean, they predate most everybody in this room. One's 1942 and the other's 1945. There we have them on display out in front. Stop and look at those so you can see how it's all changed. If you get a chance to, you see Sean around town, stop and thank him for his hard work on this.
Okay. So, at this point, we normally ask, do you have any questions about Pittman that you didn't get answered? I know that the depth of information you got tonight was such that it's hard to come up with something that wasn't answered, but, you know, any questions that you would like to ask? You know, I am going to take that as a no. I'm guessing here. I'm okay. Oh, no, Rick has a question.
I may have this wrong, but I was wondering if Jim Marsh could tell us a little bit about the bus trips that he sponsors to historic locations in southern Nevada. We're kind of interested in some of that sort of thing locally, and that would give us some ideas.
Rick mentioned bus trips. For years, I think 17 or 18 years, I have put bus trips on, and what I do is I charter a bus and I send out invitations to a list of people that I think would be interested, and we go to various places. We've gone to Virginia City, we've gone to Bobbie, we've gone to the Grand Canyon, we've gone to the Four Corners area of Colorado. We've gone to the Great Basin National Park, and probably the one that we do the most often is one we make a trip, start up 95, and as I say, we go from everywhere from whorehouses to courthouses. And we stop at one of the brothels up there. The last one was one that Dennis Hoff has there in Amargosa and Crystal. And then we went on up to Gold Point, and his partner served us lunch, and then we go on up to Goldfield, and we go take him to the Goldfield Hotel and the old mining district and the Nixon building and a few things like that. And then there's a bar up there we always stop at, and then we go to Tonopah, and then we usually take him up to the Campbell and Kelly Foundry the next day, which is founded in the early 1900s, and then we go on up, we go to Eureka and the court of the Opera House and so forth over to Ely, and we take the charter the train, the Great Northern Railroad, and we charter the train, go out in the minefields. We come back the next day through the Ward charcoal kilns, and my friends of mine, they have the Buffalo Ranch down there, down through Pioche, usually the courthouse there, the museum, and then down through the Cowboy's Dream there in Panaca area. And come home. So it's usually on Thursday. We come home on a Sunday afternoon, and it's usually probably $500, $400 to $500 a person is usually what it costs. So it's fairly reasonable. And I haven't put one on for 2 years. I'm going to try to do another one this year. I'd like to go back to Virginia City and maybe tie in something with the Piper's Opera House. And there's also something that I came across last year that I don't even think you've been there, Mark. It's the under in Eureka, the opium dens underneath the old Chinese cafe there. Have you been there?
I know where you're talking about.
Yeah.
I haven't been to them, but I know of.
The owner, I got acquainted with him, and he will take us down under the underground. There used to be tunnels underneath Eureka that ran from one business to the other. Now, most of those tunnels are caved in, but these opium dens are made with, whoever did it was a real craftsman. They made it with bricks, and they're curved so that it's like the old Greek styling, so that no matter how much weight is, they won't cave in. And very, very, like I say, that's kind of a highlight. So I do that every year. Anybody that's maybe interested, call me and I'll put your name on the list. And when I get one put together, we'll send you out the information on it.
Sounds good.
Let me tell you the thing. The one here about 3 or 4 years ago, I was taking them up to see Diana's Punch Bowl up in Monitor Valley. And like I say, we had about 50 people on this 57-passenger bus. And the Monitor Valley is a big, wide valley with a pretty good graded dirt road down the middle. But where I thought Diana's Punch Bowl was, I missed it by a couple miles. I took this little cow trail. And I told the bus driver, just make it you, and just if the fog came right back down the road, well, there was a little arroyo that we went through with the front wheels, no problem. But when the back end went, there's a 12-foot overhang on the back. Yeah, we hit and we were dead in the water. And we didn't have, we had no shovels. Finally, a truck went by, a pickup truck, and the guy's looking there, seeing this big 57-passenger bus in the middle of the valley over there, high and dry. And luckily, I knew the guy, and he came over. He said, well, let me try to hook the truck on, pull you out. That didn't even move. I finally got him to let me borrow the truck. I drove 27 miles back to the Hage Ranch where they had a phone. I called Tonopah. I got an 18-wheel record coming out, $1,100 worth. Got back out, and I've got all these 50 people. Most of them have never been in Las Vegas, and I'm thinking, holy cow, it started to get dark and cold. I thought, I'm going to be in more trouble. I got back there. They were having the time of their life. They'd got into the scotch and the gin. They were telling stories, most of them at my expense. So, of all the trips I've taken, that's the highlight of it. And it ended up with pictures in the Tonopah paper, a bus on a wrecker, and this, that, and the other. The other thing is pale by comparison to get that bus stock. So anyway, that was the highlight of that trip, but I'm trying not to do it again.
Alrighty then. I think perhaps something that we can learn not to do on our bus trips. Yes.
Who had a good idea, suggesting that we get everybody to stand up who at one time or another has lived in Pittman.
Oh, okay.
I want to get a picture of that too.
If you have lived in Pittman at some point in your life, will you please stand? Yeah, just stand. It's good to, you too, Dorothy, come on. There,
That's
there you
great.
go.
See if anybody knows anything about the
Well, I think we're running late here. Yeah, thank you. And what Rick was noting was, I have a particular interest in the history of bottle houses in the West. I have written the major article that was done on them. They started out in Tonopah in 1902. I will not bore you with the whole history. However, there was one in Pittman that was built in about 1946. We now know that it was by the Parkers, it was called both Parker's Castle and Parker's House of Memories and the House of Memories, but it was there for a few years, and this was a house built out of bottles, and the bottles were gathered by local kids that would bring them over, and Mr. Parker would let them help him with building the house in order to have it there. And it was built as an attraction. It was built because he needed a house for he and his wife and his kids. They had come from New Orleans by bicycle to Pittman, not a trip I would take, and we're told about the bottle house in Rhyolite, which is part of the early 20th century bottle houses, and he decided to build a bottle house because what else are you going to do in Pittman? So if you know anything more about the bottle house, please talk to me afterwards. I am quite interested in them. I'm also interested in the bottle wall that was somewhere down on about, I don't know, 8th or 9th Street downtown in Las Vegas. But I haven't been able to track any details on it yet. So we have, I guess, a couple more words from Lou, and then we're going to have a raffle.
I will only close on this one note. The crowd that's here tonight is probably one of the largest crowds we've had for these lecture series. And I just want to congratulate you that you came out and you listened to very excellent speakers, and the entire area has been well taken. Thank you.